The amount of cases announced in the past few weeks is insane. We've seen a huge increase in MicroATX cases like this open frame from Montech, Antec's new foray into the enthusiast market, and the Tower 200. We've also seen the ATX towers get increasingly complex and advanced, like Lian Li's new vision for the stand-up platform. It's a narrow tower design. This video recaps some of the best cases coming out for the rest of 2023. We still need to review the cases individually, of course, but the market is booming with interesting options, and some are even cheap, like the Montech X4 at $65 for 6 fans. But of course, some are on the very expensive side, like the Silverstone Alta F2 flagship case. Either way, we're rounding up everything we saw at Computex into one big best cases so far video. Before that, this video is brought to you by Thermal Grizzly and the CryoSheet graphene pads. These CryoSheets are molecularly stacked in the Z-axis to encourage vertical direct thermal transfer from the IHS to the cooler. CryoSheet pads are made to be easily applicable for a thermal interface and completely avoid paste dryout because it's not paste. It makes them particularly useful for long service life systems with minimal maintenance. They come in multiple sizes for suitability on the most common laptops and desktop CPUs, and you can learn more at the Thermal Grizzly CryoSheets at the link in the description below. This video today won't cover cases that have already launched this year, and we probably reviewed a lot of them already, but instead it focuses on everything coming out over the next 6 months. Of course, we'll run a best cases piece after testing them all too, closer to the end of the year, but this will set the stage. It's an exciting time for computer cases, and we're going to start with ATX and go through MicroATX and Mini-ITX from there. The amount of cases at Computex, again, was unbelievable, so we packed it all in as efficiently as we can. Everything is also timestamped below for you. Let's get started. The Lian Li SUP 01 case is up next. We're more excited about this one than most of Lian Li's other offerings, most of which are variations on the existing 011 theme. It's not a bad thing, it's just not as fresh and new. The SUP is a completely new series for Lian Li, with SUP standing for Stand-Up Platform, and they've built as narrow of an ATX case as possible while allowing a front-mounted GPU for a unique display of the most expensive part of most builds. Lian Li took what it learned from the Mini-ITX cases it's made, and it applied that knowledge to make the smallest ATX tower it could, they say, while still adding unique features. The stand-up platform makes some major changes with the computer case as we know it. First, most of the cooling is actually on the right side panel behind the motherboard tray, which we've never seen before, with 6 fan mounts available to serve both GPU exhaust and the CPU AIO. And you'll likely need an AIO because there's just not great access to air on the other side of the case in the motherboard chamber with glass on the top and the side, and also just no space. It's a narrow chamber. The case is heavily perforated though. On the right side, there's just punctures everywhere. The entire thing is mesh. The front is all mesh, and even the back is perforated heavily while still retaining some rigidity for structure. Fortunately, this combined with the lack of pressure in the motherboard chamber will encourage some air ingress through the rear holes in the VRM area. Lian Li will also be including a height-esque molded riser cable, but with an LED, and they're also using a mirrored tray in the bottom to provide some extra perceived depth. This is because the GPU has been relocated. From our perspective, this would be pretty cool with the GPU above it, but you mostly just end up reflecting cables right now. This case will require a lot of specialized testing when we get it, and it'll take some planning from the user to make sure it's built properly. They're giving you all of the tools to build a good or a really terrible computer with minimal hand-holding. But innovation can't come without some discomfort. As standard designs are departed, it's just up to Lian Li to make sure the customer is educated on how to properly build in it. The SUP 01 will be priced at $150, and it's going to ship in Q4 of 2023. You can watch our video featuring Lian Li's CEO and designer on the channel if you want to learn more. As quickly as possible, Lian Li also had 3 other cases. The largest was the 011D Evo XL, which we detailed heavily back in December and is most interesting for its vertical GPU mount and heavy emphasis on mechanical aspects. The company also showed off its 011D Evo RGB. It's an updated 011D Evo with RGB LEDs, and it has an optional kit to mount 160mm LAN-cooled 216 fans. The final was its Lian Li 011 Vision, an edge-to-edge tempered glass design relying on magnets and some glue to still have sufficient structural support. The top glass panel is a one-way mirror with the mirrored side pointed down for some extra flair, and it also has an adjustable and removable motherboard tray, taking some inspiration from the 216 previously. Now for the Phanteks NV5. This is Phanteks' smallest of the NV series cases so far, and it's shaping up more standard for mid-tower sizing. The NV5's primary unique feature is its angled bottom using a 10-degree tilt. This aligns with cutting angles on the front of the case, where the glass cuts across and follows the same 10-degree angle while opening up some of the bottom support. As we filmed it, the case was loaded with an LED lighting kit that Phanteks aims to sell separately. So this case you're looking at isn't really the one you buy. That LED kit is $70. And that includes strips on the bottom, the side, and the top. Basically, all the LED strips you're looking at. It's the accessorization of Phanteks here. They, like many other companies, have realized that add-ons make more money than the product itself. But the case is why we're here. Other than the bottom tilt, the case is mostly notable for its support of 2 fans in the rear. Phanteks, like many other companies, is opening up 140 support in a lot of locations as well, and it has space for bottom, top, and side-mounted fans. Non-modular power supplies will be difficult to manage in this case for cables, but the upside is the fan support in the bottom front will be open for access to air. As for cable management on the back, most of that is handled by a cable cover to hide everything. The NV5 is going to be $130 on its own, and then if you want any of the kits, it really gets expensive fast. Availability is supposed to be August 2023. Up next is the Win Dubili, which the company says stands for Do Believe, and it makes it as part of their I Build, I Share initiative focused on enabling PC DIY all the way down to assembly of the case with a flat-packed approach to shipping. Win noted to GN that it started this initiative out of interest of bringing new aspects of PC building to a younger generation, and that's all very commendable. But what brings us to the product is the case itself. We saw the Dubili ATX case in Win's design center in a video on our channel, which itself is super worth watching just for some behind-the-scenes content on a cool location. The Dubili case is a chassis largely made of aluminum and defaulting in silver, white, and orange coloring for the primary case styling. Win is playing with champagne and other colors as well, but it's seeking community feedback before pursuing them. The Dubili uses a function-focused, ventilated front and rear panel, solid aluminum construction, and optional handles and extensions for the front and back side plates. These handles are modular and can be swapped with other styles of handles. They can also be removed for a handleless design or accompanied with leather grips that Win is experimenting with. Win plans to ship 4 140mm fans by default, and noted that it can fit radiators up to 420mm in the front and 360mm in the top. Fan mounts are also present in the rear and bottom of the case, with up to 2 120 or 1 140 supported in the bottom. Interestingly, rather than rivets, Win is using Allen key screws to hold the panels together. This makes it ultra-modular and modifiable by users with access to, say, fabrication equipment, your own CNCs, 3D printers, or whatever, or just Win's future accessories if it makes them. Win plans to have this optional as flat-packed or just built, similar to the POC series cases, and that's to heavily cut down on lost shipping volume in containers. The big savings comes in freight shipments, like ocean freight, where you can now use fewer containers to ship the same product on fewer pallets. This means a lot of good things. One of them is a reduction of environmental impact in a big way. Another one is a reduction of cost. Unfortunately, though, Win told us that it doesn't plan to lower the price for consumers just yet, but that it'd like to in the future. It just kind of depends on the volume they hit for sales. Ultimately, as a product, we mostly like it for the mix of higher quality materials and of a function-driven design that still manages to look clean and unique, with the aesthetics giving something different for that white, silver, and orange design and for the champagne colorway. But even with all these visual and color-focused elements, the case still is a computer case, and it still offers the functionality of being ventilated, mesh, and having good ease of installation features. But of course, we need to review it, so maybe hold on to your purchase until we do. We have one on the way, so we'll know more soon. Price is to be determined on this one. Montech Air 300 and 3000 Max also land on the list for being function forward and using space well, but Montech also has some more affordable cases that we'll get to, which is a nice break from all the expensive stuff. For the Air series, the front panel is mesh, but Montech is using some plastic bars and almost fractal north-like spacing, just not with wood, for a different look. Cases have mostly moved away from more than 2 3.5-inch drives, but the Air 3000 accommodates up to 11 using both the space on the back of the motherboard and the modular add-on drive cages behind the front intake fans. Some of these are included, but most are sold as add-ons, which helps reduce the initial MSRP of the case. This used to be more common, but since people have largely abandoned hard drives, or at least having lots of them in their builds, modern options for cases with support for lots of hard drives have dried up. The Air 3000 Max prototype also has a set of cutouts on the motherboard tray to accommodate the reverse cable motherboards that several motherboard manufacturers showed off this year. However, because there's no standard for the reverse cables at this point, it's difficult to anticipate every area that might need a cutout, and Montech basically guessed at it without sacrificing too much structural rigidity, but that's in prototyping. This, though, is accompanied by 30 millimeters of clearance behind the board to help with cable management. It also helps with clearance as cables stick out through the tray. The Air 3000 Max will come with 4 140mm ARGB fans, following another trend we noticed this year, which is manufacturers moving to 140mm fans finally. And they're able to do that now because they've had to deepen the cases anyway to allow for new GPUs and to allow for this cabling trend. The case also has a pop-up dust filter that sockets into the front, something that Montech is proud about with this design. There's also a smaller version called the Air 300 Max that's designed for MicroATX motherboards. It ticks most of the same boxes as the larger Air 3000, just with support for fewer drives and smaller radiators, but it does sort of broaden the MATX form factor where we're seeing a burgeoning support lately. Montech's other cases are most interesting for their affordability in a market filled with expensive cases. Most interesting is the Montech X4, which we first talked about back in December. It's the successor to the X3 case, and it keeps the budget price point alive at $60 for the black version of the case and $65 for the white version of the case. The case includes 6 fans, just like the X3, and now also uses ARGB fans while moving away from the Molex centipede that we joked about previously in the X3. The case has also moved to a thicker steel this time around to help with rigidity. The case should ship around October of 2023. Next is the King 95, a very O11 style case with a few Montech tweaks like the curved LED bar on the front. It comes with 2 separate front panels to give a choice between curved glass or mesh, with the curved part of the glass being really the only visually distinct aspect to separate it from the O11 clones. We think the mesh one is far more interesting looking though, just because we haven't seen many that look quite like this. The right side fan mounting is going to be changed. They're moving it to rails instead of these holes because doubling up on the holes here will only hurt the performance and they serve no function. It's still in development right now, but it's supposed to be available without fans for $110 or 2 140s on the right and 1 120 in the rear, all ARGB, for more than that. Montech's K95 pricing will be $110 to $160 depending on the color of the fan count. It's supposed to come out in November. Deepcool also had an interesting entry into the case market. The Morpheus is a pseudo-modular case that the company introduced alongside other trending pseudo-modular cases from Be Quiet and Lian Li this year. Each panel can be completely removed, so the case can be built in either a standard ATX layout or in a dual chamber layout with a significantly deeper cable management channel and a relocation of the power supply and drive cages to the back of the case. The aqua teal color that Deepcool showed off was initially intended to be just a one-off for the unveil, but after seeing all the comments from press and from you all below, and yes, they actually told us they read them, we've learned that Deepcool is now seriously considering the new colorway. The fans are still TBD. Deepcool considered a single molded set of 3 fans, but this is kind of counter to a modular case, and we hope that they won't follow through with it. 3 separate fans would be far better and far more useful long term. The case also includes an LCD with CPU and GPU readout, similar to what we've seen on Antec, and the case is airflow centric. It has a heavily perforated right side panel to accommodate side-mounted fans or radiators, has a perforated front panel, and a heavily perforated top panel. They're also shipping a bag of plastic pegs with each case. These are meant to be a fun or low-cost way to do something clever without being overly serious. They fit in the mesh holes, and as long as you don't block all of them, they won't really impact airflow meaningfully, but they do add some character for pixel art designs. The Morpheus will be expensive at $220 to $230 depending on colorway, and it's launching into a market packed with this price of case, so it'll be tough to compete. Up next, we have a whole video from Computex dedicated to Silverstone's cases, so we'll keep this section brief. Our favorite case from the booth was the one we spent the least time on. It was the RM600, which is a large dual chamber case with 12 hot swap drives and dual power supplies. We didn't get much footage of it, but it can be either rack mounted or stood up on casters like you see in our footage, to make moving it around easier. There's enough room inside and cooling potential and drive cage potential to build a really nice home lab or office server, and the hot swap access with a backplane built in it makes it basically a mini server rack, except more portable for most people. Silverstone also showed off its D1 case, which is aimed at the workstation crowd and supports dual CPU motherboards with up to 11 expansion slots. It also has 3 of Silverstone's new air penetrator 180mm fans on a hinged front panel, which allows access to multiple drive bays. The sturdy front panel on its own is already noteworthy. It hinges out on hefty hinges, and it's got a kill switch to stop any power delivery. This is another one where it's just kind of a cool and interesting case, but not one we typically look at. If you're building a home server though, maybe consider Silverstone. Finally, the Alta F2 is more in line with what we look at in reviews. It's an ultra enthusiast case, has a 90-degree rotated motherboard, multiple video card mounting locations. It actually positions them at an angle as well to direct the air straight into the cooler, and it has 3 air penetrator fans to move air from bottom to top. The F2 sits atop a large intake chamber to establish that bottom to top flow path, more similar to Silverstone's old Raven series. These cases are both expensive at $600 or so for the D1 and $1,000 or so for the Alta F2, and you can check out our dedicated Silverstone video for more on these. Be Quiet has 3 upcoming major case launches: the Shadowbase 800, which is its cheapest at $170 to $230, the Darkbase Pro 700 in between, and the Darkbase Pro 901 at $300. We'll focus on the 901 in this section as it's the most complicated, but check our previous Shadowbase 800 coverage for a cheaper Be Quiet case that's still expensive, unfortunately, with new tooling. The Darkbase Pro 901 sticks with the invertible functionality of the line of chassis, but this time it makes it much easier to do with fewer screws and panels to relocate. The case can be configured either in standard layout or flipped and inverted, and it has a fully separable motherboard tray for doing this. The case includes a lot of optional pieces that definitely contribute to the high cost, half of which you won't use because they're one or the other options. The front panel can be swapped for mesh or kept with a brushed aluminum plate. They're both included. The top can use included deadening panels or mesh. The fan cages are fully separable as well, and other small mechanical elements are present everywhere in the case. The power supply shroud, for example, has a side plate that can be removed and has its integrated LED header molded in, and other cages and panels use pogo pins everywhere to reduce wiring holding plastics to the frame. In line with the wiring reduction, the GPU support also includes a channel for cable routing and works in either standard or inverted layout. The case goes heavy on I/O support with 4 USB 3 and 1 USB Type-C on the top, plus an option for a 5¼ bay on the bottom, or just more hard drives. At $300, you're paying mostly for flagship features and basically 2 sets of parts for half the panels, since they're replaceable with airflow or deadened alternatives. The case should be available within a few weeks. Next up is the more affordable Thermaltake Ceres 300TG, priced at $100 to keep the lower end market alive and launching within about a month or so. The Series 300TG includes 3 140mm ARGB fans, and it looks like it'll be good for airflow. We liked Thermaltake's attention to detail in this case in general, namely the bottom fan position having good unrestricted access to air, and the dust filters lining up well with perforations in the top panels rather than accidentally obstructing them. Several years ago, we criticized Thermaltake for stacking up filters and panels in a way that severely hampered the fans, but it looks like that's gone now. They've fixed it, and we like to see that growth in designs. Colors are available in black, white, and this matcha green colorway. The main point of interest for this one, other than maybe that green color, is the inclusion of 3 140mm fans with relatively good ventilation while still being a $100 case. With so many cases over $200, the presence of something more normal, like this and the X4, is critical to keeping PC building on the affordable side. Next up is the Thermaltake CTE C700, using the company's new case form factor that centralizes the board and rotates it. This is a slimmed down version of the recently launched C750. This layout lets you fit radiators on both the front and back, unlike most cases. Optionally, both the front and rear support mounting 2 200mm fans instead of radiators, and the GPU can also be mounted flat on a riser in what would normally be called vertical mounting. The rear chamber is deep with plenty of room for cables and both 2.5 or 3.5 inch drives. Pricing for the C700 is $160 for mesh and $180 for glass, and this is one of the more interesting ones for its potential as an open loop build. Streacom's SG10 passive case also interested us at the show. This is a fully passive enclosure that includes 2 pumpless loops for circulating refrigerant and will sell for around $1,000. It's priced high, partly because the massive amount of aluminum going into building the included radiator, which is a structural part of the case, the inclusion of those loops, the kit for adapting the GPU to a passively cooled system, and because it's fully passive, so find it somewhere else, basically. The fins are spaced wide apart to allow the heat to leave with minimal obstruction, which is part of the natural physics approach to cooling a system. We never covered this one before the show, but our new understanding is that LTT covered it multiple times back when it was a different company kickstarting the project. In the time since, Streacom has stepped in as an experienced manufacturing partner to try and get it made, because the first company basically failed at that. Streacom is best known for its manufacturing of the open bench table, and other than bailing out Kalios, wasn't involved in the original Kickstarter. We'll probably talk more about that abandoned Kickstarter when it comes time to review the case, but for now, this show is our first hands-on exposure to the concept, and we're focusing on the specs. The SG10 uses copper tubes, not heat pipes, to cycle refrigerant through a loop that runs through the top panel, which is entirely made of very tall aluminum fins. There are 0 fans in the case, and as long as you adapt the GPU to be passive with the included kit and buy a passive power supply, there won't be any fans in the system at all. It's an expensive way to go fanless, and the case is built of black aluminum fins, black structural steel vertically, and silver-colored aluminum blocks for some accents. Front I/O is movable to anywhere within the front and rear of the case, as it's just mounted between the structural support, and the bottom uses acrylic as a floor. The next category is for MicroATX. MicroATX is finally getting attention for the first time in basically a decade, and it's because the extra slot length of GPUs spills over past ITX anyway, so case manufacturers are seeing an opportunity to re-expand MATX. Montech is the first one we'll talk about. They showed an open frame case for Mini-ITX and MicroATX motherboards that's extremely reconfigurable. This one being called a case is a little bit of a stretch, it's more of an open bench, but it can be assembled in 5 different ways, ranging from as small as only the motherboard and the power supply, to adding a CLC and a massive GPU on a riser, with other configs in between. One interesting aspect is how the motherboard mounts. The standoffs face rearward on the frame, meaning you screw the board down from the backside of the chassis. This visually recesses the board for a clean and integrated look from the front, and since the rear side has no sort of cover, it looks industrial at best, again, more like a test bench. The power supply mounts behind the board in all configurations, but one option is a frame that can also hold the aforementioned CLC radiator. This makes for more overall width, but also more cooling potential without having to hang a giant tower off of the socket. Most of the parts are made of thick machined aluminum and held together with screws, so it seems sturdy, at least from the brief hands-on we had. Between this and the customization options, it would be good for people who enjoy the assembly process itself and want to also build the case. Montech is also playing with an option for a wooden base. This follows the wood and metal aesthetic we've been seeing at the show, but the type of wood and the color isn't final yet. Antec is up now. It's the first time they're making an appearance on our channel in many years. Antec revolutionized the case market in the early 2000s and was actually the maker of the first case I ever bought. They fell off hard after the Antec 900 and then completely lost their way by chasing mobile batteries and other useless accessories for years. Now Antec is trying to make a return, and the team we met was serious about it. So we are cautiously optimistic, maybe. We'll see how it shakes out. The company had its ATX performance cases present, but those have been out for a little while now. They're considering shipping these though with even higher performance variations of the fans using thicker fans, so that's something we'll return to in the future. The main showing was the Constellation MATX 540, which itself is based on the same supply as the Asus Prime AP201. This is a MicroATX case with a few design upfits to accommodate 40 series cards, like it being lengthened for an extra slot for the GPU, supporting up to 5 slots. That also helps with additional spacing for breathability. The case has a small, simple display on it for temperature readouts, with a display connecting via USB 2. The case will be available in white with a tempered glass, a full mesh option, and a solid, silent option with foam damping, and pricing is $80 to $100 depending on which. It should be available late Q3. Next up is the Thermaltake Tower 200, an updated and larger Tower 100. Thermaltake took a lot of our criticism from the original Tower 100 and put those insights into the final version and then into this new case, targeting both cooling performance and somewhat showcase aesthetics in that fish tank style. First off, the Tower 200 has been stretched just enough to allow for MicroATX boards, up to 4-slot GPUs, and a 280mm radiator on a removable bracket on the right. The case has an increased focus on airflow, with the left side panel being entirely ventilated to allow access to fresh air for the GPU. There are lots of other vents and perforations elsewhere, like the 2 fan mounts in the rear of the case. The rear fan mounts initially don't look like they do anything since they're against the motherboard backside, but there's enough of a gap that they end up pulling air from GPU exhaust instead. At the bottom front, Thermaltake included a removable panel to fit the same LCD screen it's been using on other cases like the Series 300, and the Tower 200 is launching in 5 colors, so those looking for options outside of black and white will also have turquoise, racing green, and matcha green to choose from. And that LCD is a separately sold add-on, like many of the screens these days. Mini-ITX also had an increase in attention this year, largely because manufacturers are redesigning to fit large video cards. Fractal's showing was its Terra and its REDACTED on display, the latter of which only made it in a shot like this, and we can't say anything else about it right now. But the Terra is fair game. This one is Fractal's second smallest case, right behind the old Node series. The Terra primarily interested us for its mechanical construction because the top panel pulls away with the strap. The side panels are Gullwing door style panels, both of which fold up and then can be removed entirely with a switch. This gives relatively free access to the case interior for the build, but there's always going to be the pain in the ass factor of Mini-ITX. The center spine in this sandwich style is also mobile and can be biased towards either panel to allow for a larger CPU or GPU cooler, using a free movement system with guiding tick marks to adjust the tray. The bottom of the case can technically fit fans, kind of, but it's likely you'll run into cabling issues. This case primarily tries to cool itself by feeding air directly into the GPU via the side panel, and the same for the CPU, so it's relying on that venting being open enough. Regardless, it's not a top choice for an i9 and a 4090. We'd really recommend building something lower end than that, just to limit thermal challenges. Visually, Fractal has a black, silver, and this green color that we saw. The green version uses a darker wood accent on the bottom, and all of the cases use thick aluminum plates with some detailed CNC work. You can learn more about that in our hands-on video. The case is already available, priced at $180. Win took part of its ModFree series and turned it into a standalone Mini-ITX case with wood paneling. This is actually from the same mega computer that we showed in our original Win video, and we actually did get a shot of it at the show, we'll show that now, where it was hanging like a chandelier from the ceiling of the booth. Anyway, the Mini-ITX one, this is something that Win tried long before the North in terms of the wood paneling, but it never had wide-reaching success, unlike Fractal did. The straightforwardly named ModFree Mini is based on the module that holds the power supply in the regular ModFree ATX set, but was modified with mounting locations for a motherboard, SFX power supply, and GPU. The missing piece that Fractal found, but Win was missing previously, was the look of how they actually used and integrated the wood, and it looks like Win has learned from that. It's finished with a wood slat side panel design, again similar to the North, as well as brown top and front panels. It's a clever reuse of an existing case, basically, or part of one anyway, that shows some of the creative spirit we saw while touring Win's design center. We don't know what the price will be of the ModFree Mini, and we're uncertain of the airflow at this time, but it's clear that Win at least wants to try alternative materials again. Another Mini-ITX case we saw was the Win POC1. It ships flat packed for you to assemble yourself, including some bending. Rather than using screws, or obviously rivets though, the case uses Velcro or possibly leather or vinyl straps. They're still deciding. And then you do some shaping of the panels and tighten the straps down. Once you do that, you've got a case. We think this is a neat idea, but we have some reservations about the GPU cooling and how much people will care about the self-assembly if the price isn't any lower than other ITX cases. The POC1 is also experimenting with wood paneling, but it's not final yet. This case follows up the existing POC lineup, which has multiple bright color variations, like the yellows, blues, greens, and other cases that you saw, but that case is already launched. It's the POC1 that's new. Last is the Acer Orion X, which we checked out as a fully assembled pre-built, but which will be available separately for the DIY market towards the end of the year. This is a sandwich-style Mini-ITX case with some cool mechanical elements, like the latches to release the side panels, including intuitive labeling, a removable top panel for easier access during the build, and a hot swap M.2 enclosure in the front that can also be used as a standalone M.2 drive. Some of it verges on being gimmicky, like the top headphone or headset hanger and handle, but in every respect, Acer is at least trying to be taken more seriously in this design and get away from association with only cheap laptops. Acer is going for a space station-inspired look, it told us, and the price is the biggest challenge. At $300, that's solidly in the same range as some low-volume boutique ITX cases. Overall though, we like what Acer's going for with the Orion X, and we plan to review the pre-built separately, at which point we'll be able to comment on the case quality. We're out of time here, but there were of course other cases we either didn't see or we didn't think made it in. EK has an in-Win collaboration on a huge and expensive case, but it's not quite ready yet. Cooler Master had some ITX and ATX concepts, and MSI had cases that, while better for MSI, just don't make the list yet. But that's it for this best cases roundup so far for the rest of 2023. Check back for all of the other individual videos and for the reviews as they come up, and you can subscribe for more or go to store.gamersnexus.net to support us directly. Thanks for watching. We'll see you all next time.